Sunday, but there's no need to be alone. Join us for Sunday at home.
Tailgate Meet and Greet, 2 to 4 today. Stop by our parking lot anytime between 2 and 4 p.m. today for our version of a tailgate party. There will be a mix of MHBC folks to visit with you and share treats together. Please park in the Bell lot if you are not a tailgate host. Journey to Thanksgiving, October 3rd to 10th. In the week leading up to Thanksgiving, we will be offering an interactive experience in our sanctuary with creative stations to help you reflect, engage, and learn. There will be various times that you can attend throughout the week. Stay tuned! Are you new to MHBC? We'd love to know more about you and help you to get connected. Fill out our welcome form to get more information. Youth Group, Tuesdays, 7 p.m. Our junior and senior high youth groups have resumed. Meeting to
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Mount Hamilton Baptist Church Sunday at Home. My name is Leanne Friesen, and I'm the lead pastor of this church in Hamilton, Ontario. Sunday at Home is a ministry that allows any of us to worship from around the world, from around our city, for whatever reason that gathering in person may make it difficult to come out and be in person with us today. This ministry allows us to continue to be together and seek God. It may be that you are a member of Mount Hamilton. It may be that you're checking us out. Perhaps you're a family friend watching from afar. We are so glad that you're here today and that we continue to do this together. We know that all over the world, there are varying levels of COVID restrictions. And so if you're wondering what it's like in Ontario, we're in a position where we are allowed to meet for worship in person, but social distancing and masking is still in place. And because of social distancing, that means that in our in-person service, we can probably fit about 60 people. And so lots of us still need to use this way to gather, and we're still having many of us be really cautious about those inside gatherings. And so we want to keep doing this ministry to allow us to gather and to keep being able to stay connected to God and to each other. You'll also get to see Pastor Sam leading us in worship today, and shout out to Jacob Smith in the studio who's producing for us. And later we're going to have a guest share some of his story, one of our much beloved church members, Brian Baillie. I hope that if you were listening a couple minutes ahead of time, I want to thank Chad Pilo for sharing with us, for reading our announcements for us. One of the things we've continued to seek to do as a church is to make sure this is a space where everyone can come just as you are. That's our church's motto. And last spring one of the things we talked about was how to make greater space for people who live with disabilities. And so one source of feedback was, for Sunday at Home, someone who had a visual impairment wouldn't know the announcements because they are simply written on the screen. So thanks, Chad, for doing an audio version for anyone who needs to be able to hear our announcements. And we hope we can keep creating space for all who want to come and join us. And we hope you'll feel that space today, wherever you find yourself, whatever situation you may find yourself in. Together, our theme in these weeks has been out of the famine. And I'll talk more later about what that means. But basically, we're talking about this idea that when we come out of seasons of great deprivation, there's often a lot that comes with that. We'll be discussing that more. And as we come and acknowledge that reality, we're going to join in a prayer together. I invite you to join in this prayer by reading the response that says all. And as I've said other weeks, we've been using this prayer for a couple of weeks now. I invite you to think about how others are reading this with you, and that you are not alone. Even if you're maybe joining in this service from wherever you are alone, none of us are alone. Let's pray together, and then Sam will lead us in some worship through singing. And after Sam has led us in worship, Aravind Sithamparapillai is going to read the scripture for us. Let's pray. As we enter into this time of worship,
we do so with you, God.
As we leave one day and start the next,
You are with us, and you are faithful.
As we leave summer and come into fall.
You are with us, and you are faithful.
As we come out of the famines in our lives.
You are with us, and you are faithful.
As we take each new step.
We do so with you, God.
Amen.
Well, good morning, church. We are going to sing together now, starting with Good, Good Father. And as we sing these songs and as we sing these words together, my prayer for you is that you just feel the love of God wash over you as we sing these together. Oh, I've heard 1,000 stories of what they think you're like, but I've heard the tender whisper of love in the dead of night. You tell me that you're pleased and that I'm never alone. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. Oh, I've seen many searching for answers far and wide, but I know we're all searching for answers. Only you provide, 'cause you know just what we need before we say a word. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. Love so undeniable, I can hardly speak. Peace so unexplainable, I can hardly think as you call me. Deeper still as you call me. Deeper still as you call me. Deeper still into love. Love, love, you're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. The next song that we're going to sing together now is Great Are You, Lord. You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness. You give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. You life. You are love. You bring light to the darkness. You give hope. You restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will sing, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only.
Hello, MHBC. Today's Bible reading will be from the book of Ruth, chapter 2, verses 1 to 13. Ruth meets Boaz in the grain field. Now, Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Just then, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you." "The Lord bless you," they answered. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, "Who does that young woman belong to?" The overseer replied, "She is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters." She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." "May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my lord," she said. "You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants." This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you, Aravind. And we're going to look at that story some more. But as we often do, we're going to start with a little game that's connected to that story. In that story, we heard about some activities during harvest time. Now, we're in the fall. we're in a season of harvest. We're here in southern Ontario where there's lots of farms and lots of people harvesting in their gardens. And so the game to start today is, can you name this piece of farm equipment? Now, we have in the room with us, Jacob is here. And also, as I mentioned, Brian Bailey's going to share later. So you might hear either of them share. And I'm going to be honest in saying most of these I have written down very carefully which they are, because I did not grow up around farms and I am very useless. So I'm going to do very poorly at this game, even with the answers in front of me. So here's the first one. Gentlemen, any guesses? What is this? Give yourself a point for each one you get right.
Spade. Yeah, let's call a spade, Leanne.
Let's call a spade, sure. Hoe, shovel, spade, whatever. So we use that to dig up our vegetables. Either of you have gardens? You gardeners?
No.
No, me neither. Okay, we're going to be a fun group. Okay, this next one.
Machete.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, exactly. I had knife, but we'll even say machete. We'll go big old knife. So obviously, you need knives sometimes when you harvest. I didn't realize, first couple of years I had a vegetable garden, which I'm poor at, how many things you just cut with a knife when I would Google how to harvest them. Cut it with a knife. Okay, how about this one? This one I knew. I'm from Newfoundland. I use this one all the time. Maybe not as much up here. Some of you might not know it as much.
I guess it's for sifting out rocks out of soil. But...
No, look at me. Do you know, Brian?
Not a clue.
This is a berry picker. So if you were to go pick blueberries, which like grow near the ground, you like scoop it and then see how they go into the thing.
Ooh.
So lots of blueberries in Newfoundland, and we would grow up picking blueberries and you'd sell them for like a couple bucks a gallon. It was a great way to make money when you're 10 or 11 years old. Okay, now is where it goes downhill for me. How about this one? You know the fancy name for this?
Sickle?
Yeah,
It's a sickle. You're
not
doing
a
well.
scythe. It's just a sickle.
Is there a difference in those things? Because I don't know.
Scythes are two-handed.
Oh, okay.
Sickles are one-handed.
So here we've got a sickle, a fickle sickle, perhaps. Sorry, I just felt the need to rhyme. Okay, how about these next ones? The thing the gentleman is holding there. Well, I can't. Maybe it's a gentleman. I'm not sure.
Tell.
It's shears.
Yeah,
I mean,
garden
yeah,
shears, yeah.
cutters. Not a hard. Okay, how about this next one? Do you know what this is for?
Absolutely no idea.
This is a harvest bucket, so often for apples. So you would wear it around like a backpack. Only the front would be a pouch that you could put fruit in when you're picking it. So peaches or apples. I know, right? I learned so much. Here's where it really falls apart for me. The big farm equipment, I have no idea. Okay, anyone know what this is?
No.
It
I
looks
get-
like
it's
something
okay.
you load fertilizer in and pull with a tractor.
Sure. Well, it's a grain cart.
Grain cart.
A grain cart. I'm assuming it carries grain. Okay, the next one is. I found these very hard.
I think, is that a wheat thresher?
It's a thresher.
Oh,
Yes,
very
this is for
good.
threshing the wheat. And here's the next one. Do you know what this one is?
Tiller?
I mean, it says it's a reaper, but I don't actually know what a reaper does.
It's like a furrow plow. That's,
As long as she's
I
not a
have
grim
no idea
reaper.
what that does.
As long as she's not a grim reaper, I think we're
Yeah,
okay.
I think maybe that's where the name comes from.
Maybe.
And then this is the last one.
Ooh, it's a combine harvester.
It's a
Wow,
combine.
show off.
It's
which-
the Rolls Royce of the farm.
Which I now understand is the thresher and the reaper combined, hence a combine. Okay, you guys did pretty well. I think if I hadn't read them ahead of time, I would have gotten knife and berry picker, and I would have been out. So I would have been at like 2 points. Share how many points you got in the comments. Thanks, gentlemen. And so as we think about this, I want to start by saying, if you were going to harvest something, let's say you owned a farm and you actually had to harvest this farm, which of these pieces of equipment would you want to begin with? I would want to start with the combine, right? If I had a big field of wheat, I want the best, most exciting, most efficient, easiest piece of equipment. I don't want to take a sickle out to a wheat field. I would love to use the combine if I can. And I think life is like that as well. When we get to a certain place, we want things to be as good as they can be. We want to be able to use the best opportunities we have. We don't want to have certainly to go backwards with things. If we owned a combine, we don't want to have to go back to using a sickle. And there's lots of times that this might apply in our life. When I was growing up, we never had a dishwasher. When I was a student, the houses and apartments I lived in never had dishwashers. When we were first married, never had a dishwasher in our apartment. But when I got to our first house, it had a dishwasher. And I remember about a year in, the dishwasher broke down. And I'm going to tell you, it did not take long to buy a new dishwasher. right, guys? Because after you've gotten used to using the best thing, I didn't want to go back to washing dishes by hand anymore. And I think I tell this because I think that today's story is actually a story of someone to have to go back to washing dishes by hand. Actually, quite literally, go back to harvesting in a very difficult way. We've been looking together at the book of Ruth. The Bible is a book of many smaller books, and Ruth is one of the tiniest books. It's written about a time that happens just after God's people had settled back in the promised land. And it tells us at the beginning of the book, we've looked at it for 2 other weeks now, you can go back and hear these sermons if you want, that there was a man named Elimelech who was married to a woman named Naomi, and they had 2 sons. It says, however, that there was a famine in the land, in the nation of Israel, which was God's promised land to his people. And it says Elimelech and Naomi with their sons leave and go to Moab to wait out the famine. But while they're there, tragically, Elimelech and his 2 sons die, leaving Naomi a widow with 2 daughter-in-laws named Orpah and Ruth. We read that Naomi decides to return home to Israel. When she goes home, she encourages her daughter-in-laws to go back to their home. She says, my life's been a disaster. You don't want to come with me in this place of pain. You won't be able to remarry. You need to just go back and hopefully find someone to provide for you. Because at this time, to be a widow was a very scary, risky thing. Women didn't have the same ability of ownership, of working as men had. They needed to be married to be provided for or be in their father's house. Orpah goes back to her family home, but Ruth says she's going to go with Naomi. And we've been talking about this book as we talk about what it's like to come out of seasons of famine. Naomi was coming out of a literal famine, a time of actual deprivation of food in their land, but also a metaphorical famine. She was actually still right in the midst of this, right in the midst of grief. And we've talked about a couple of things already that sometimes happen out of those seasons of famine in our life. As we look at what happened to Naomi and Ruth, we talked about how in our first Sundays we talked about this theme. We talked about coming out of the famine, out of difficult seasons, can sometimes include reevaluating our lives. That's what Naomi and Ruth did. Naomi decided to return home. Ruth made a fresh beginning. We talked about how we're changed from the famine and how when Naomi got home, she said to her old friends, don't call me Naomi anymore, call me bitter. And today we pick up the story with what happens after Ruth and Naomi have returned home. And we read that Ruth says, I'm going to go and glean in the wheat fields. And this is where the story begins with Ruth. This is where today begins with Ruth gleaning in the wheat fields. Let me explain more about what that is. This obviously was harvest time. In fact, the book of Ruth is read often now still at something called the Festival of Weeks, which was a festival to celebrate the time of wheat harvest in this part of the world, in the Jewish faith. Because again, it's so connected to harvest, the story of Ruth. So in many ways, it's interesting that we're reading it in our own harvest season, which I didn't plan, but worked out great. And so they're collecting wheat. And the question is, how will Ruth and Naomi survive? They don't own any land. They don't have husbands or sons who can work and provide for them. And so Ruth says she will go and glean. And gleaning was a practice that was set aside for those who were poor. It involved going to a wheat field after it had been harvested and picking up the bits that were left over so that you could make your own bread to survive. It's talked about in the Bible when God had given his laws to his people. In Leviticus 19, it said, when you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner. I love that, right? God is such a compassionate God, and he wanted his people to live in compassion as well. And so he says, listen, don't go back over your fields and over your vineyards and pick every last little bit that's left. And don't even go right to the edges. Leave some space for the poor and those who need it, which is a beautiful thing. But for Ruth and Naomi, I think this would have actually been an experience of going backwards in their lives. When Elimelech left to go to Moab, this shows us that likely Elimelech and Naomi were people of wealth or privilege. Poor people could not afford to move. The fact that they had gone to Moab in order to wait out the famine indicated that perhaps they were a little bit more well off than others. And now Naomi has come back to her homeland and they are poor. They are poor widows. Her daughter-in-law has to glean, take on the action of the poorest people. I wonder if that was hard for Naomi after the famine. If they both felt that loss of status, that change of what life had been, that sense of going back to this thing when they'd been at the combine phase of life. And now it's like they're back to just using that sickle or that knife. And there's other reasons that they would have also really been, we can see that there would have been some sense of being on the outside. We already heard Ervin read the comment when the man who owned the first field that Ruth went to glean, the owner, when he asks about her, gets this reply, Ruth is the Moabite who came from Moab with Naomi. And so there's this naming, just to be clear, she's a foreigner. So she was also someone from the outside, and they named that quickly. And then we read in verse 7, again, this person saying this says, she said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. She came into the field and has remained there from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. Ruth is working hard. And so these people who may have been somewhat well off have gone from that place to now working in the heat of the day all day just for the leftovers in the fields. We have a clear example of something here that can happen after the famines in our lives, after seasons of change. Things don't always go back to the way they were, certainly not right away. Now, I've told this story a couple of times because it really inspired this series, and I think it's helpful, about an analogy that I heard that I think named well this season. And it came third hand from someone who was telling me they'd heard someone say this. And someone commented that in our lives, there are seasons of fasting and feasting. In the West, in our part of the world, feasting is often our norm. We often have the ability to have a lot of what we want, many of us. Not everyone, but many of us. And so we need the spiritual discipline of fasting to balance that out. But this person said, the last year and a half for all of us weren't a fast. They were a famine. We didn't choose it. And by that, I mean a metaphorical famine. We went through a time of deprivation, social deprivation, emotional deprivation. And as I thought about that imagery, which so resonated with me, that these seasons of shutdowns and COVID restrictions and such a tumultuous time have been like a famine for many of us. What I got to thinking was, after times of famine, you can't go back right to the feast right away. You know what I'm talking about? When I was pregnant, many of you may know that I was very, very ill both my pregnancies. I had a condition called hyperemesis. And both my pregnancies, I struggled with chronic vomiting and nausea, and I could not eat hardly at all. It was very difficult for me, and there were many foods I couldn't eat. After I had my daughter, I still remember this very vividly. I had her at like 6 in the evening, and it was about 8 at night. My husband was getting ready to go home to pick up our son and be with him at home. And I said, I need something to eat. I haven't eaten all day. I was, busy having a baby. And he said, what do you want to eat? And I said, what? I said, whatever, I can eat anything because I had the baby. I'm not going to be sick anymore, right? And so I remember he came back with a chicken Caesar wrap. Oh, Caesar stuff, like Caesar, I never could have eaten that. And I was like, this is great meat I couldn't eat. So I eat this big old chicken Caesar wrap. I'm like, I feel great. Well, about an hour later, my husband's gone. I don't mean to be graphic. I saw the wrap again. And I was violently ill for several hours. The nurses were actually very anxious. They had to call in a prescription. I had to take these extreme anti-nausea drugs, and I was absolutely miserable. It was horrible. And I had made a mistake, right? I wanted to jump to the feast, but my stomach couldn't handle it anymore. I needed to do that slowly. And I bet you've had those seasons too, right? Even if you've had like a stomach flu. After you've had a stomach flu, you don't go and start with a honey glazed ham and a chocolate cake. You need a little bit of broth or a slice of toast. And so I was thinking about how this is so true in our lives after famine as well. In our day-to-day lives, for example, after a health crisis, and we're going to hear this more, you often don't just jump back to your body being like it was. And after COVID, things aren't exactly like they were either. And we might have thought we could just jump back to the way everything was. forgetting that it's hard to jump from the famine to the feast. We want the combine, but actually we're starting with the gleaning. That's what happened to Ruth and Naomi. And that can be hard. We can have feelings about that. And I have it on a slide here as a warning to you, Jacob. I said there's a few things that can happen when we find ourselves gleaning, when we wish we could, just jump back to being able to use this big equipment as this metaphor. Taking those steps back can feel humiliating. Let's just name that. Friends of mine, their church sponsored a family from Syria a couple of years ago to come to Canada as refugees, which was wonderful. And they were part of very actively supporting them as they settled into the community. And she explained that the family that they sponsored had been very wealthy and quite high up in society in Syria. And so what was happening was almost every day they were getting phone calls with people, with some member of the family saying, could you drive us to this appointment? Could you drive us here? Could you drive us there? Well, of course, my friends just didn't have the time to drive all the time. And after a while, they said, we're going to show you how to use the bus and you're going to need to start using the bus. To which this family said, but we don't use the bus. Right? And again, we could look down on that, but the reality was it was hard for them to step back to this other way. That had not been their life before, and the bus felt humiliating to them. It can be scary after the famine to find ourselves in that season of gleaning, not quite back where we used to be. Again, another story from my life. Some of you, again, will know, lots of you know me well, that a few years ago, my two of my nephews and my dad were in a really horrific accident. And my one nephew was actually had a very serious brain injury and was in a coma for a number of days. And we did not know what it would be like when he came out of that coma. And as he was lying in that coma, and one of the things we were told is he's going to come out slowly. That's how brain injuries work. He's not going to wake up and be himself. And what that meant was when he started to wake, he would still kind of be in this active sleep, but he would groan. And then as he woke a bit, he wasn't able to fully speak. And then they warned us, as he's recovering, he may not be able to walk for a while. He might not seem like himself for a while. And so those early days of coming out were terrifying. And we were always saying, who is he going to be? Is he going to come back all the way? And we didn't know. As he came out of that time of famine, he didn't jump back to who he was. And that transition of waiting was very scary. It can be very frustrating when we're transitioning out of the famine. I think our kids and our teens understand this a lot, right? Kids, teenagers, going back to school with all the things that have changed has been really hard, I think. I spoke to someone last week, a neighbor, whose daughter started school in person for the first time this year. She did remote all last year. And he said she's finding it really hard. She wasn't used to what it would be like to wear a mask all day. She was really disappointed to discover the cohorts that she couldn't talk to her friends from other classes. She was having a hard time adjusting, and that transition was frustrating. And the changes in schools have been frustrating for our precious young people. When we come out of the famine, it can shake our identity. Last week, Charlene McLennan shared with us a great example of that in a season of famine that she came out of, she felt like she was a different person. She was struggling with a chronic illness, and now many things that she valued about herself that she before had been independent, didn't need help, now it was a change in her identity. And it can be disappointing. And a great example of that, of course, is even thinking of what it was like with church, right? When we come back to church, we want everything to be, if we come in person, we feel ready for that. We want it to be the same. We want it to feel amazing. And it actually does feel really special, but it can also be disappointing to come and be like, oh, I can't sit near someone I want to sit near, or there's not as many people here. And we struggle with that disappointment. And I think Ruth and Naomi may have felt these things as well. Humiliation. They have to glean like the poor people, scared. Is this how we're going to survive the rest of us life? What are we going to do when harvest is over? Frustrated. Look what happened to us. Shaken identity. We're not who we were. Disappointed. They didn't start with a combine. They started with gleaning. They didn't go back to a feast. They were transitioning out of a famine. They were having to live with broth and toast, not a roast beef dinner. And that's difficult. And as we come out of this season collectively, we also don't jump to the feast. I remember, a year ago when churches were talking about the big party they'd have when we all got back. It almost seems silly now. In fact, coming back not only is it quite now we can't even do it in this big way we'd want, it may feel overwhelming. I've talked to so many people who, I remember one week before someone was going to come in person for the first time, they said, I'm really nervous. I said, oh, really? And they said, I haven't seen some of these people in so long. Will they want to talk to me, do you think? And I thought, oh, that's when I realized, jumping back to the feast is hard. And I look back and I can see that perhaps as a church, we focused a little bit too much on feasting language. Come back to church, it's a party, come see everyone again. And that may have been overwhelming. Kind of like you just had a stomach bug and someone puts a chocolate cake in front of you and you think, oh, I can't do that. And that's why I think we can remember that as we come out of these seasons, we can start with the smaller things and let that be okay. We don't have to stay in the famine, even if it's difficult to transition out of it. We are just going to often start with the gleaning, either because that's the only option or because we realize that's what we need to do to transition back. And so as a church at Mount Hamilton, one of the ways that we're trying to make space for that gleaning, that broth experience as you come back, are things that can let you do that. We have our online prayer connections, and those are those small ways to reconnect again. You can keep coming here online. When you come on site, we're slowly bringing things back. We're meeting outside for our social time afterwards. We're still keeping all that distancing as regulations call us to do. Today, we're doing this tailgate in the parking lot. And that was really intentional because we realized sometimes to say we're all going to meet in a park was a bit intense. But instead, we're going to have about a dozen cars in the parking lot with, 10 or a dozen people, families. And you can come and you can take that little bite of toast, right? Visit with a few people. Come to the church parking lot again. Start making space. And in 2 weeks, not in 2 weeks, actually a week from today, we're going to have the week leading to Thanksgiving. We're going to be doing something called a journey to Thanksgiving. And we're going to have some stations in our sanctuary. And you can come during the week or you can come next Sunday, the Sunday after that, not next Sunday, but 2 weeks from now. And you can be a part of worship in that way that allows you to engage in worship with God, but really in that bite-sized way as we start to transition back. It doesn't help to just stop eating. It doesn't help say, I'm in a famine, I'm never going to eat again. We just may need to start with the gleaning. Maybe you felt stuck with what you cannot do, or maybe you've been surprised and that's confused you, and now you're going, oh, that's what's going on. What I want to remind you is that God can be in the gleaning. And this is where, again, I want to paint that picture of the fullness of what happens in Ruth. God was always at work in Ruth and Naomi's life, starting with what we see in this passage. We discover that somehow this field that Ruth picks in which to glean belongs to a man named Boaz, who is in fact a relative of Naomi. Now, we might call that coincidence, but coincidence is when God shows up and we just take a minute to catch on, is my opinion. And so then we read that after she's done this gleaning, we see even the protection beginning there. In verses 8 and 9, he says to Ruth, my daughter, don't go and glean in another field and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I've told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you're thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled. This was a big deal. Already he's looking out for her. He says, you don't have to go to any other fields where you might not be safe as a single woman with lots of men working around, all the complicated things at that time. And of course, still today. He said, stay here. My men have been told to look out for you. Even go get a drink if you want one. And then a little bit later, after the day is done, we read this. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar. So he's inviting her to eat. And then she eats with him and he says, as she got up to glean, he said to his men, let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her. At this time, gleaning was just picking what was left over. You waited till everyone was done. Now she's actually allowed to go in as the harvest is happening. Boaz is saying, even leave her some behind. The season of just relying on gleaning is already starting to transition out. God is already at work to bring her back, to bring Ruth and Naomi to the next phase that God will have for them, which will be a season of flourishing. The gleaning may not last forever. There will always be changes. Things won't look the same at the end. But even though we may start, maybe we feel like we're going backwards a bit, step by step, God's working new things, and God will be with us. Let's pray. God, we thank you that you are present in the gleaning. You've not forgotten us. You do not overlook us. We pray that as we take these steps back in this season to our lives opening in new ways, that we'd remember you are with us every step of the way. Amen. In this series, I'm going to be inviting people to come and talk a little bit about the famines in their lives, again, that we're using as this metaphor. And I am so excited today to welcome our guest, Brian Baillie. So again, we're in the same room, but we're a distance apart. So hi, Brian. Last week I tried to throw something at Charlene. It went really bad just to show her in the same room, but I'm not even going to try again.
Thank you.
And lots of you will know Brian. Brian has been a member of Mount Hamilton for many years. Yeah, he's our site manager.
Yeah.
He's also works as our custodian. And he went through a very scary time for all of us last spring, a true season of famine. And I'm so glad he's well enough to be with us today. And I'm going to let him tell about it. So Brian,
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about the famine you experienced over the last few months? You've been through it.
Yes, I have.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. It starts off with our daughter and her husband purchasing a new home in Brantford back in December of last year.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of work to get done there. At the same time, my wife and I decided we were going to sell our home here in Hamilton and ultimately move into this beautiful home in Brantford. So that was going to take work on both ends, both to get our house ready for resale, as well as getting the house that we're moving into had a lot of work to be done. As the process unfolded, we get now into February, March. I realized that I'm not feeling quite 100%. I'm getting tired, a little bit more easier than I usually get, which led up to on April the 9th, which was a Friday evening, I developed extreme pain in my neck and shoulder, which ultimately ended up in an ambulance ride to the hospital on April 15th. Yes, April 15th. Seems like forever ago.
It does. Mm-hmm.
Anyways, as a result of the trip, I was taken down to St. Joseph's Hospital, and I was diagnosed with a blood infection called MRSA, apparently a rather severe blood infection, as well as I was diagnosed, which I am now, a diabetic, and other stuff. Numerous tests, CT scans, MRIs, ultrasounds, x-rays, some tests I can't even pronounce, numerous blood tests, and of course, 17 COVID tests, which I really enjoyed in my 73 days in the hospital. 73 days, which partway through it, I had an operation on my left knee to flush out the infection caused by MRSA, and then was sent to rehab. So that was going to be the extent of my stay. Probably 3 weeks in, I'm in rehab at St. Joseph's, when all of a sudden I wake up on a Wednesday morning and I'm having trouble breathing in, something I've never experienced. Thank goodness it was during the day. Within a very short period of time, I'm surrounded by many nurses and doctors. I'm taken down to the cardiac ward, where they took approximately 9 liters of fluid off my chest. 9 liters? That's like a lot.
I don't even know where you'd fit that in your body.
I didn't know either, and I didn't know it wasn't there the day before, apparently. But anyways, they managed to get that off me, and at that point in time, they realized that my heart was only functioning at a 16% capacity, which wasn't, I'm told that wasn't good. But I did not know that until much later. Subsequent to that, they drained the fluid. I can not fully breathe in, but I can breathe in a lot better than I used to be. I was then taken by ambulance to the general hospital for something called imaging, which is where they take a probe, in my case, up on my left wrist, and that probe goes up to take a look at your heart muscle to see what's going on. They told me later that day that I had 100% blockage in the artery in my heart. And my first response was, well, how come I'm still alive? With 100% blockage, I figured that's kind of bad. So anyways, long story short, I was then destined to have open heart surgery. I had to wait almost 3 weeks to get the appointment because of an issue I was having with my kidneys. But anyways, on June the 11th, Dr. Whitlock from the General Hospital performed the open heart surgery, took a vein out of my right leg, replaced 2 veins and an artery in my heart, put a new valve in my heart, changed the oil, greased up, and sewed me back up. So here I am. I am now laying in an ICU, trying to recover from open heart surgery. And that was slow at first. I could barely talk when I woke up. But I was on the right side of the grass, as they say. Post that, I was taken to a ward. Never forget that as long as I live. And I had a mate that also goes to Mount Hamilton Baptist Church who was within a few feet of me, and that was Susan Andrews. She had gone for open heart surgery a few days before mine.
Absolutely.
So we were both recovering on the same ward. The next morning I was told that there was some complications, which I really didn't want to hear. But I had fluid that was located between my ribs and my lung, which was preventing me from taking in full breaths. That had to get removed, which it was, and I started to get better. But in the meantime, this is now into June. The house has been sold that we lived in Hamilton, but still needed work to get it up to where I wanted to get it to. So along come my heroes. My wife, my daughter, my son-in-law, excuse me, my nurse, Caitlin, her assistant, Joshua, Josiah.
These are kids from our church.
Yes. And of course, Michael and Brad. We're all part of the process. Excuse me. To get my house ready for sale and to be able to move out of it. Next comes my next hero, and his name is Bruce Smith, who did the work I was supposed to do at our new home. Did an amazing job. However, during the course of my stay, I lost, oh my goodness, over 20% of my body weight. But I got to tell you 2 comments I received during the course of my stay, which had an impact on me. First was from this amazing woman sitting to my right. She calls me one day in the hospital, and her first words to me, "Brian, how come you're still here?" Now, you have to understand, I thought that was extremely funny.
Yeah. Well, how are you walking around?
But when you think about it, she's right. I didn't know the answer to that.
Yeah, walking around with diabetes and a blood infection and a heart valve that wasn't working that you didn't know.
And the next comment was from my family doctor. I went to see him after I came home. He walked in the room holding a clipboard, looked at the clipboard, then looked at me and said, "Wow, there was nothing else that could have gone wrong with you." And he was accurate. He also told me that he had triple bypass surgery, which is what I had, and it took him a year to recover. So that Leanne goes over part of the famine that I experienced.
Yes.
Being unable to do what I wanted to do, but yet others certainly picked up that slack on my behalf. So.
And you were in hospital, you said 73 days.
73 days.
During COVID, when hardly anyone could go see you.
And
you did, and scared the wits out of us all a couple times when truly there were 2 different times that it was life and death. That whether or not you would live was.
I was told by the doctor, another cute story, when they take me down to the cardiac ward, I meet a doctor. She is probably 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide. I'm in bed in a room, and she walks in and says the following to me. She says, "Brian, you're going to put your hands on the table. You're going to put your head on your hands, and you're going to hold still." Not, "Hi, Brian, how are you?" That's the first words how I met this doctor. And they went through my back to drains to start the process of draining some of the fluid off my lungs. The next day when she came back in to see me, she said to me, "Brian, honestly, had this happened at night or on a weekend, chances are you wouldn't have survived."
Wow.
So I thought, wow.
So, Brian,
Yep.
So again, big famine.
Yep.
Thanks for painting that picture for us, because I know so many have been worried about you and wondering really what happened. In what ways, this is a 2-part question, but in what ways has life been different as you started to come out of that famine? What was it like to have to take baby steps back and not be able to go right back to your old self? Because I'm sure you didn't just jump back to
Correct.
everything.
If you know me, I have very little patience. So trying to get better, trying to learn how to walk again because of the issue with my left leg, and then being in bed for such a long time, not doing anything, waiting for the operation, was very frustrating. And as my wife pointed out to me, I was no longer the care provider, I was being provided for. Yeah, so watching people do what I should be doing was very frustrating at first. I didn't understand why I couldn't do it, but my body could not do what my brain was telling it to do. I said on June the 12th, which was the day after my operation, was the first day of the rest of my life. But Leanne, I could not go back to being my old self, because if I do that, which is eating the wrong foods at the wrong time, drinking far too much Diet Pepsi during those days, if I go back to that way of life, then my life expectancy will be much shorter than I hope it's going to be. So I've had to make changes in my diet and exercise. I'm back at rehab for my leg and trying to maintain a much more positive attitude about the process. So that's where I am with that. You're going to ask me about God?
Yes. So what did you learn about God in this season?
Interesting. Recently, when I was talking to one of the gentlemen from AA who I grew up with, his name is Dan.
And they rent here at Mount Hamilton,
Yep.
and that's one of the things that you did. You helped facilitate that rental, so
Yep.
you're very close to the people.
Yes, and Danny and I mean, Dan grew up just around the corner from me many years ago. But he asked me a question. He said, did your faith ever wander? Did you ever not believe? And I said, oh, absolutely not. I said, God was always with me. I said there was a few times when I certainly questioned, like after the operation when we had some post-operation issues. I said, okay, God, come on, man, like how much more? And sorry?
So much.
I felt like I was alone sometimes. But as my wife pointed out, in the, I think is it Footprints?
Yeah, the poem?
Yeah, that he was carrying me.
Yes.
So, so I never doubted that he was there. For the most part, my faith never waned. God had to be with me. Because there's a purpose for me
Amen.
sitting here right now. Anyways, yep.
Brian, thank you so much for sharing this so vulnerably. It's so beautiful. And
Sure.
we can all see it, right? That you didn't just get to go, oh, my surgery is done and now I'm cleaning again and I'm fixing my house.
Yep.
Your body's still taking time. We're so glad to see you looking well. But what advice do you have for people coming out of their seasons of famine? Your famine was so dramatic and extreme, but you know this feeling of like, I'm coming out and I don't get the combine. I just got the knife.
Yep.
Maybe you just had like a rusty old blade. Like you really had nothing.
Correct.
So what advice do you have for anyone who's like, you know what, I'm coming out of that hard place too, and I'm not myself and things aren't the same. Do you have any wisdom to share?
Well, I have very little wisdom, but we're going to share what I believe in.
Thank you.
Is that to realize that realizing that the season of famine is going to come to an end. But flipping a switch will not make everything the way it was. I know I tried that. Make a plan that is both flexible and realistic. And please ask for help. Ask God for direction and seek help from people who can help you make that plan and organize yourself to go forward. It makes a huge difference. I have gotten frustrated. Early in this process, I got very frustrated with not being able to do what I wanted to do. But then I had to realize that I couldn't do it. And getting frustrated wasn't helping me heal. So if it's whatever you're going through, whether it be financial or physical, realize that there is an end and ask. My only thing is to ask for help from your pastors, from your friends, from doctors, from professionals. This has been an amazing time for this planet, let alone just this church. So I think asking for help, to me is one of the most important things you can do. And listen, and not just ask for help, but listen to what people are trying to help you do. Again, a flaw that I certainly have.
Brian, that is so beautifully said. I feel like I have another whole sermon in me now. When you said that, I thought about the story of Ruth and Naomi. Naomi had to let Ruth help her. And the story starts with Ruth saying, Naomi, go back to your father's house. Like, don't come with me, right? She tries to do it alone.
Yep.
But Ruth comes with her. And then it's Ruth who has to go to the fields and glean. That's a sermon right there, Brian. And you model that.
Glad I could help. Glad I could help.
Let us receive help. That's such good insight. Thank you, Brian. We're just going to take a moment to pause and pray together. And I invite you to just think about what you've heard Brian say about how that may speak to you now, and say, God, be with me in this season and show me the steps for me to take as I step out of my own famines. We're so glad you're here today. And again, I want to say a huge thank you to Brian for sharing that powerful, powerful story. And a few announcements as we go from here. Again, we remind you that you can like and follow this page, Mount Hamilton Baptist Church, if you're watching on Facebook, or you can also subscribe on our YouTube channel if you're watching there. We thank to any of you who are continuing to give or wish to give to Mount Hamilton. You can do that by going to our website, www.mhbc.ca, and click on Donate. We want to tell you, I already mentioned the two things coming up today. We're very excited. Maybe you haven't heard about it. We're doing our tailgate meet and greet between 2 to 4 in our parking lot. You can park in the Bell lot. It's open on Sundays, or if that's full, you can park in another spot. We're going to have about a dozen cars out. We've got hot dogs. We've got hot drinks, cold drinks, fun little treats, little things to take home. What'll happen is you'll come and you'll just kind of go car to car, and you'll be able to visit with 1 or 2 people at each car and get a little treat. And it's that great bite-sized way to reconnect to your friends and family at Mount Hamilton. Next Sunday, again, we'll have more information about this journey to Thanksgiving, which will be stations set up in our sanctuary to journey together and spend that one-on-one time with God in creative ways. It'll be great for all ages, and we'll have different times. It's available 2 or 3 times during the week that you can come and do that as your schedule allows. Don't forget that if you would like to come in person, you have to email sundayonsite@mhbc.ca to sign up for the service or for Sunday school, which is now back in person. We're glad about that. But you can also continue to join us right here next week at 9:30. And if you found this message helpful, do feel free to share it and pass it on with others who may need that encouragement as they come out of famines in their lives. As you go, may you know this. You are the people of God. You're the church. You're the body of Christ. You are called. You're chosen. You are sent. May you go from here to be God's light to the world. Amen.
Amen.